Hey guys, this is Karan here. I live in Saudi Arabia studying 10th grade in Yambur International School. So, today in this section we'll be talking about the study of life, and we will start the course with biology, and we'll learn biology mostly by presentation on the PowerPoint. So let's go ahead and start off with our section, and let's say today is a warm summer evening, and maybe you're laughing and joking around with while uh, while waiting to eat at the family barbecue. Now, as you sit down for dinner, mosquito flies flying around have the same idea, but their dinner is you, not the barbecue. So probably the most attention that uh, that you pay to mosquito is when you take careful aim before smacking them. Now, biologists have somewhat different views of mosquitoes, unless of course they are ones being bitten. But in those times of logic and reason, the biology can see a mosquito just as one example as great diversity of life are found on Earth. So as you guys can know, we'll be talking about the biodiversity on of life found on Earth. Now, there's some basic key vocabularies that we need to know in the course of biology. Okay? Now, the first key term would be biology itself, because when we learn biology, we need to know what are we talking about. Well, whatever we learn in biology is the scientific study of all forms of life. Okay? So there is study of life, then there is the cells, the chapter of cells. Everything is scientific study of all forms of life. There is present the study of life, in other words. Now, the second most important vocabulary is the organism. Well, organism is any individual living thing. Now, people mix up organism with the species. With species, and we'll talk about species right now. But organism is any individual living thing. Individual. Okay, don't consider an organism as a group. Third would be cell. Well, the cell is just a basic unit of life. Now, metabolism. Well, because of metabolism, you have energy in yourself, which basically means when you eat food, all the chemical processes that build up or break down food materials, and because of that is known as metabolism, and because of metabolism, your foods are being crushed down or breaking down into proteins in which by which you get energy to survive. The last one, and the basic key vocabulary that you need to know is DNA, which is genetic material, or as known as deoxyribonucleic acid. Now, key vocabulary terms for this section would be biosphere, and all living thing and all the place they are found on Earth make up the biosphere. Okay, so everything, every living thing, and every places that you can possibly think of are basically found on Earth. You never went to the Mars or anything. Everything, every living thing, and every place you can find on Earth are make up the whole biosphere. Now you can think about your friends, family living in a neighborhood, and that is a biosphere. Okay, because it's on the planet Earth. Now, second is biodiversity, which is kind of related to biosphere, which basically means that the variety of life are basically found across biosphere. Now, basically, if you make your own group of biosphere, you're basically making a biodiversity, which means that you're making your own neighborhood. You're thinking about your own neighborhood. Well, that neighborhood from the whole globe or from the planet Earth is known as biodiversity. Okay, now, like I said, people mix up organism and species. Now, organism is just one kind of living thing, and species is basically a particular type of living thing that can reproduce by interbreeding amongst themselves. Okay? Now, let's move on to our section. Well, we'll be talking about diversity of life, and in diversity of life we'll be talking about biodiversity, and there's two important points that I want to discuss is that every living thing and wherever it lives makes up the biosphere. You living in your neighborhood makes up a biosphere. Your friends living in their neighborhood makes up a biosphere. Okay, your parents making living their neighborhood makes up a biosphere. The biosphere basically can include deserts. Some people might live in deserts, some people might live in grasslands, some people might live in forests, lakes, oceans, and portion of atmosphere. Whatever you can think of, it's known as biosphere. Okay, so we go to the biodiversity. Okay, how is it different? Well, there's a great variety of life on the planet that scientists have identified that 2 million species, there's tens of millions that have not been identified. So as you guys can see in the picture, these are some birds that have been identified, and there's 2 million species along the other kind. So this is one kind, this is one kind, this is other kind. So there is total of 2 million species, and tens of millions have not been identified yet. And most of the species that have been identified are all known as insects. So biodiversity. Now the thing about biodiversity is that across the biosphere, the variety of life is known as biodiversity, as we know. But biodiversity increases as you approach the equator, and more species can survive in area with consistently warm temperature and a more consistent food supply. Now, that can also mean that whenever you are moving towards North Pole or South Pole, the biodiversity decreases. Okay, and whenever you move towards the equator, the biodiversity will increase. Now, what you need to remember when you think about biodiversity is that species is a group of individuals who can reproduce and produce offspring that can reproduce themselves. Okay, so this is what I want you to remember. Don't mix up your species with the organisms. Now, unifying characteristics of living things would be defining a living thing that isn't always easy. Now, some organisms like viruses, as you guys can see, now there might be different types of viruses, but again, it's one living thing. We are not talking about species of viruses. Okay, so they fall into the middle category because they don't have all characteristics. However, this characters makes a biologist's life a little easier, so they can find out what type of species are over here, what type of species, this is red blood cell, but what type of species are located in your body, what type of species is located in the ocean, what type of species are viruses, as you guys can see over here, and plants. Okay, so plants come in identifying as organism. Now each type would be known as species, and it tends to be that every living thing contains 4 basic traits. Now the first one would be cells, because we know that every organism is made up of one or more cells. Now there's 2 categories of cells. One would be single-celled organism, and other one would be multicellular organism. But here, the single-celled organism are the most common form of life on Earth. The second would be the need of energy, because we need energy to survive, right? So this is the reason why we learned the vocabulary. In that vocabulary, we said metabolism is necessary, because what happens is whenever you eat a substance or a food, whatever your favorite food is, when you eat it, it goes into food pipe, and after it's going into food pipe, the process takes a place which is known as metabolism, which basically is crushing or breaking down your food particle and giving you guys an energy to survive, so you can walk and run. Okay, so need for an energy. All living thing needs energy for their life processes. The form of energy used all living thing is a chemical energy. Now, since metabolism is chemical process, it's a chemical energy that you need for your survival. Now, response to an environment. Now, organism, well, whatever type of climate you live in, if you live in a cold temperature, um, you tend to survive in cold temperature. Then, if you go to a hot temperature, you might not survive there. Same with the birds; they tend to live in near the equator because they like the warm climate, and basically what they like is that more food supply is available for them near the equator. And this is why we say that biodiversity or biosphere, across the biosphere, the variety of life, which is known as biodiversity, is greater closer to the equator. Okay, now the examples for response to environment would be a plant over here tends to live in the sunlight than when it's put in the shade, because when it's put in the sunlight, you have the plant goes in the process of photosynthesis, by which it makes food for itself. Now, like I gave you guys an example that a person who tends to live in a colder temperature cannot live in a hot temperature. What I mean by that is that, let's say this organism was polar bear, and as you guys can see, polar bear tends to live in cold cold temperature. When the polar bear is put into an equator, well, it cannot survive; it would die, because it's more comfortable in living in the cold temperature, since it has all the furs around its body. The last trait would be reproduction and development. Well, we know that all organisms must have the ability to reproduce. Now, a group is considered a species when individual can reproduce and produce fertile offspring. Now, I've considered this point an extra point, but it gives you the idea of species. Okay. Now, the example in species would be mules. Okay, so we come to an end of this presentation by having four questions, and I want you guys to write the answers in the comment section below. So go ahead and give it a try, and I'll check your answers as soon as possible and give you guys hints on how to remember this whole section very clearly. Thank you for watching, guys. Have a great day.